right, it is now 7 o'clock Mountain Time, and we're here for the final session of day one, which is Father Brenden Humberdross with When You Can't See the Magic, Aphantasia and the Spiritual Journey. Brenden Humberdross is a native of Queensland, Australia, experiencing its vastness as his family moved for his father's work. His parents always encouraged an open approach to religion as a personal matter. His curiosity has taken him through many different phases of personal development and has led to a deep personal faith, a lifelong love, and an academic interest in religion and spirituality. Brenden has an interest in the Western mystery tradition, having taken degrees in a number of Masonic bodies, and is a member of the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia and a neophyte in the tradition of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. In his secular life, Brenden has studied education at both an undergraduate and postgraduate level and has 18 years of teaching experience across a variety of schools and subjects. And Brenden and his wife, Monique, live in Maryborough, where they raise their blended family of 6 children, which is the real initiatory journey that confers enlightenment or poverty. Yeah, or both. It's or an appreciation of ibuprofen. Brenden serves the communities of southern Queensland as the first rector of St. Teresa Parish in Brisbane, with missions in both Maryborough and Toowoomba. You know, Canada's got some weirdly named places. We've got a variety of languages here, but I think Australia takes the cake over all of them. Plus, it has things that want to kill you just for fun. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Father Brenden so he can work his magic, which you can't see because that's the nature of the talk.
Right, yeah. Let's see if I can find the right window to share. Share. Oh, look, you get to see the end before the beginning. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, lovely. Now I'm trying a little bit of a new setup today, so I hope that it all sort of works okay. And I'm basically in a big tin box, so I'm praying that my internet connection holds out okay. I've got it sort of set up off my personal hotspot, sitting just outside the door, so hopefully it'll all work. First up, thank you, Eminence, for your introduction. It's really quite an honour to be here presenting today amongst a list over the 3 days of folks who are probably far more learned than myself in a lot of different areas. But hopefully what I've prepared today will rise to the occasion and find itself worthy of the company that I'm amongst. Here in Australia, it's become common practice before public meetings to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. And even though we're not meeting together, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the Butchulla people, the traditional owners of the land which I'm presenting from today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I recognise their connection to country and role in caring for and maintaining country over thousands of years. May their strength and wisdom be with us today. I'm going to start my presentation off probably a little bit differently this morning compared to the other presentations that we've had, in that we're going to have a little guided meditation. It won't take us very long, just a few minutes. So if you're somewhere comfy and you can just sort of relax out a little bit and close your eyes and listen to the dulcet tones of what's probably my grating Australian accent. And I'm just going to take you through a little guided meditation as sort of an illustrative exercise. So if you're sitting nice and comfortably, I'd invite you to take a deep breath through your abdomen and hold that breath for a few seconds, exhaling slowly. As you breathe, notice your stomach rising and your lungs filling with air. Breathe in and breathe out. As you exhale, imagine the tension in your body being released and flowing away. Inhale, exhale. Feel your body already relaxing. As you go through each step, remember to keep breathing. Inhale, exhale. Feel your body releasing all the tension, becoming relaxed, calm, and peaceful. A wave of relaxation is flowing from your head, down to your neck, through your chest and back, into your arms, legs, and feet. Now imagine yourself walking towards a quiet, inviting beach. You notice the white sand stretching along the shoreline as far as your eyes can see. You begin to feel the warmth of the sun across your face. You stand there and just take in the warmth. You feel it flowing all through your body. Breathe in and out. Walk in the sand. You feel its warmth on your feet, while at the same time feeling the coolness of the ocean breeze on your skin. You gaze at the ocean and see a deep shade of blue with white crests of waves sweeping towards the shore. You take a moment to watch the beauty of the ocean. You hear the calm breaking of the waves. You take a deep breath in and can smell the cleanness of the salt. Oh, there we go. The joys of technology. My apologies. I'm back.
That's what editing is for.
Oh, goodness me. Rightio. Well, we'll kind of pretend that we did a lovely visual guided meditation. And are you going to pop up? Let me have a look. No. Hello. Right, there we go. Rightio. So we'll pretend that meditation went really well. Now that we've completed that brilliant exercise, I want you all just to take a moment and think about what happened in your internal world during that exercise. What was it that you saw, heard, and felt? Did you see the beautiful sands and ocean before you, hear the waves, feel the sand beneath your feet, and maybe the sun on your face? I imagine that for most of you, some of that would have at least occurred. For me, however, and others like me, experiences like that are vastly different and can best be described as being blank. I'm personally one of an estimated 5% of the world's population who can't produce mental images, a condition often referred to as mental mind's eye or third eye blindness. My presentation today is going to be an exploration of this phenomenon, its impacts, and how it's affected and continues to affect my personal spiritual development. I'm going to break the talk up into sort of two sections. I'm going to discuss some science and then have a time for questions. And then the second half will be sort of some personal experience, practicalities type stuff. I'm going to do the very typical conclave thing right now. And before I begin, I want to make it extremely clear that I'm far from being an expert in neurology, psychology, meditation, esotericism, the Western mystery tradition, practically anything outside of what goes on inside of my head. So for the most part, what I'm going to be sharing has simply arisen out of my own experiences and journey of self-discovery and coming to understandings about myself and the way I operate. So like me, My presentation today will probably be totally flawed, but hopefully it will be of some benefit to somebody. From the earliest times of the historical record, we can see that there's constantly been people who've sought to look deeper for meaning, deeper with regards to meaning of the world around them, within themselves, and into the processes that makes us what we are, that makes us functioning, thinking humans. If we go back to the period around about 350 BCE, Aristotle produced a work called De Anima, which, and I don't know it very well, but from my understanding, is a treatise that explores the soul and the concept of soul in different organisms and what differentiates organisms based on that concept. Within this work, Aristotle discusses what is termed Aphantasia. Now, I'm not a linguist, and I'm pretty sure that there could be some room for debate around what this term means, but it's generally at least linked with what we'd call imagination and is often translated accordingly. When very briefly discussing imagination, Aristotle states that it's that in virtue of which an image occurs in us, which never need to have been actually perceived by the senses, nor ever really exist. He also appears to go so far as to link the very act of thought with visual imagery when he says, whenever one contemplates, one necessarily at the same time contemplates in images. In short, I suppose Aristotle was linking the ability to produce images in the mind with the human ability to think and contemplate. Given the influence of Aristotelian thought, and especially on Western society, I don't think that it's totally unrealistic to say that the ideas of thinking and contemplation have intrinsically been linked with the idea of mental images, and that this has in turn influenced the way that, as a whole, humans have come to understand their interior experience for a vast length of history. And for me, an examination of this concept shows that even now it continues to play a large part in what we think of when we think of mysticism and spirituality in practice. Over 2,000 years later, a fellow by the name of Francis Galton, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right, who was a British polymath, undertook a statistical study. Now, the point of his study was to, and this is a bit of a mouthful, to elicit facts that shall define the natural varieties of mental dispositions in the two sexes and in different races, and afford trustworthy data as to the relative frequency with which faculties are inherited in different degrees. While the study that he undertook may have been fueled by dubious motives, if you look up the name, he was a social Darwinist, a eugenicist, and a scientific racist. So even though the point of his study probably wasn't terribly loving in motives, they did provide the first collected and published data related to individuals' abilities to produce mental images. The first time someone asked the question, what can you see in your head when you imagine? In his study, Galton asked subjects to think of a definite object, and the object he suggested was their breakfast table from that morning. He then asked his subjects to describe the quality of the image based on three factors: illumination, definition, and colour. Now, whilst it wasn't a study of huge breadth, he did find that 12 out of the participants couldn't produce a mental image, and that those who could displayed a great variability in the quality of images that they produced within their heads. And something interesting that he found was that those 12 who stated they couldn't produce mental images were actually his colleagues in academic endeavours in the field of sciences. While, of course, studies in psychology and psychiatry and neurology have been ongoing since the time of Galton, and they've included elements of studies into consciousness and imagination, advances in the field of visual imagery are a relatively modern phenomenon. It wasn't until 1973 that the first formal psychological measure for visual imagery, the Vividness of Visual Imagery Questionnaire, was constructed by psychologist David Marks. This instrument consists of a series of exercises where individuals are asked to visualize certain items and then rate the qualities of the perceived images. The higher the score, the better the visual imaging capabilities of the individual. Since its creation, the VVIQ has been validated and referenced in over 1,200 studies in a variety of fields, from psychology, neurology, various branches of the neurosciences, and the like. However, it wasn't until 2010 that the idea of a lack of mental imagery being an issue gained any significant public interest. This was due to an article that was published in Discover magazine, which was based around what I've termed the curious case of patient MX. The individual that's known as patient MX was a man in his 60s. This gentleman had spent his career working as a surveyor, a career which, according to his own account, required him to use his skills of mental imagery frequently, and he personally considered those skills to be exceptional. He's quoted as talking about every evening rerunning the film of his day's work and buildings he was surveying and the sites that he'd been in through his mind and vividly walking through the next day's tasks. However, in his 60s, he underwent heart surgery. And after undergoing this surgery, patient MX found that his life was changed in a way that he could never imagine. His faculty to view images in his mind was completely erased. The issue disturbed him enough that he sought out medical advice, went to his own doctors and to specialists, and eventually found his way to the offices of neurologist Professor Adam Zeman, who thought that the particular case of MX warranted further study. It was the first time that Professor Zeman or any of his colleagues had really been presented with someone who claimed to not have any other neurological disorders, but to have not really spontaneously, he'd undergone surgery, but we'll say spontaneously undergone such a neurological shift. Zeman formed a team with a number of individuals, including cognitive neuroscientist Sergio Della Sala, to conduct some research into patient MX's acquired disorder. At the start of their research, they decided that it was important to examine current thought on the role of visual imagery in our neurological processes. Through their survey, two contrasting ideas were selected to be the foundation of their own neurological research. The first was the commonly held idea that the mind's eye is constantly at work during our moments of awake, and that it's both central and necessary to the decision-making process of the human mind. For example, this perspective says that if we were to get up and go for a walk down to the corner store, that our mind's eye would become activated, would construct the possible paths that we were going to journey on, and that through examining these visual constructions, we decide on the correct behaviour and correct path to take. Harvard professor Stephen Kosslyn, for anyone who's interested in reading these sorts of things, was a well-known proponent of this position. In contrast to this idea, there was some competing views that, while not totally dismissing the importance of visual imagery in our thought processes, did suggest that while visual imagery was central to this decision-making process, it wasn't the sole key to that process, and that there were other elements at play that work on processing that information and allowing us to recall it. So once a foundational basis, or that key questionable hypothesis, was formed by Zeman and his team, the first step was, of course, to ensure that patient MX was functioning cognitively in the normal, for want of a better term, field of cognitive function, and that his visual faculties were within the normal range as well. Mainly to ensure that, despite MX reporting no other neurological problems, that his brain imagination, his blind imagination, wasn't part of a greater neurological disorder. A battery of tests were performed on patient MX and a number of control subjects of a similar age and occupational background. From memory, they weren't surveyors, they were mainly architects, but working in that same visualizing plans, buildings, locations. The initial tests indicated that MX's functioning was not significantly different to any of the control subjects. In short, MX's ability to form memories, to access and use them, his vision, his ability to put names to faces, and his general intelligence weren't impacted by his claimed inability to see mental images. So once that was all squared away, the second part of the study was to look at what was going on inside of MX and the other subjects' heads, and to examine the differences in brain function when performing tasks that we normally associate with vision and mental imagery, or vision within the mind's eye. When compared to the control subjects, MX displayed neurotypical brain function patterns when processing visual information. In this case, examining people's faces. The subjects were shown pictures of people's faces, their brains were imaged while they were doing that. And if you've ever seen brain imaging scans, you know, they have sections that are lit up, that are active in the brain. And basically, this process showed that MX's visual image processing was exactly the same as everybody else's. Those parts of the brain that had been considered necessary for visual processing and the mind's eye were functioning absolutely 100% normal to external stimuli. However, this changed drastically when the stimuli changed from external visual stimuli to verbal stimuli, asking the subjects to imagine things or to view things in their mind. In this case, subjects were asked to imagine the faces of famous actors when given the cue of their names. The brains of the control subjects displayed the exact same activity as when they were viewing the actual faces of individuals. So when the control subjects were asked to imagine Brad Pitt's face, the same regions of the brain that process looking at a picture of Brad Pitt's face lit up. So I suppose it kind of became clear that there was definitely a mental image going on inside of the control subject's minds. However, patient MX's visual processing or mind's eye centers remained absolutely silent when he was asked to perform the same task. A finding that absolutely challenged the ideas of Zeman and Della Sala and the other people on the team when it came down to the idea that visualization in the mind's eye was an essential part of human cognition. Zeman, Sala and their team then went on to test the subject's ability to perform tasks that were generally thought to require a high level of mental imagery to complete. The test subjects were asked to recall visual information by describing items and landmarks that they couldn't see at that time. They were asked to recall differences in the shades and tones of colour in nature without seeing them. I think it was one of the questions was to compare the colour of pine needles to, for the life of me, I can't remember what the other green thing was, and to state which was the darker tone, which was the lighter, and questions like that. Despite having a proven lack of mental image functionality, patient MX was able to perform these tasks with the exact same clarity and speed as those test subjects who had mental imagery capability. This finding was also confirmed through a standardized psychological test developed at Stanford University by psychologist Roger Shepard that consisted of subjects being shown pairs of images of complex shapes constructed from interlocking cubes. The subjects were asked to examine the two images and to state whether the shapes were the same thing, so whether they were different or whether they were the same thing shown from different angles and perspectives. Again, despite the lack of MX's brain being able to view the images and turn the objects in his mind's eye, he performed these tasks with the same accuracy and speed as the control subjects. These results were actually incredibly astounding to the researchers because past studies using Shepard's test had suggested that the mental rotation of these images was absolutely essential to gaining the correct answers. That as the complexity of the differences of perspective on the shapes increased, the time taken to state whether the shapes were the same or different increased in normal subjects. So that's always been interpreted as being that it took more visual rotation of the images to state whether they're the same or not when they were more complex. The basic outcome of this study was that Zeman and Della Sala and his colleagues published a paper and claimed that they had discovered a new neurological disorder, an acquired disorder that would eventually come to be known as aphantasia. They gave it a name like mental imagery blind. Oh, hang on, is it on here? Blind imagination is basically what they termed it in layman's terms. But Zeman and others didn't conclude their research there. It continued in other studies. But the publication of this article in a widely circulated magazine such as Discover led to a number of individuals asking their loved ones and those around them something that they'd never thought to ask before. You can see things in your head. This article resulted in a number of individuals who had always had a blind mind's eye coming forward and contacting the researchers who completed this test. And it eventually came to be realized that our understanding of the mind's eye has been completely lacking, that there was a whole category of people that didn't function in the way that neurologists and psychologists and other branches of medicine and the such thought the human mind worked. It's estimated that around about 5% of the world's population, so around 390 million people, lack a mind's eye. And many, if not most of those, having, like me, lacked it their whole lives. A further brain image study by Zellman confirmed the findings in the initial study by examining the brains of 100 individuals through imaging and scanning. It was found that those who were identified with a higher clarity of mental imagery activated a rather limited and specialized set of regions of the brain when processing complex images, and the regions that were expected to be activated, those key regions around visual processing and the sorts. In contrast to this, those who were identified as having low or a total lack of mental imagery, when they were asked to imagine something, they activated large regions of the brain, and a great variety of them, generally associated not with mental imagery at all, but with control of behaviour and with planning. So that's sort of rational type planning. On top of this, the continued research of Zeman and a colleague and other colleagues, including an Australian from the University of New South Wales here in Australia, Dr. Joel Pearson, continued to go on and demonstrate that mental imagery, like neurological and general health conditions, exist on a spectrum. It's not a black and white issue. At one end of the spectrum, there are people like myself with a total lack of anything visual going on inside of their head, through to those at the opposite end of the spectrum, like my wife, who are probably what's termed hyperphantasic and have almost totally immersive visualization experiences whenever they attempt to enter that visual mind's eye kind of field. Study is ongoing in this field, and in the recent years have seen international conferences and symposia held on visual imagery and both ends of the spectrum. But study continues and new insights are regularly being published. Amongst them is some evidence that aphantasics also display decreased mental imagery in their other senses as well. For example, imagining sounds, tastes, smells, touch, things like that. But it's early days, and reports of multisensory imagery deficits are vastly varied compared to that of images. I want to just stop for a second now that we've unpacked the science behind mental imagery and mental imagery deficits, and just see if anyone had any questions or comments. I mean, I'm not sure I'll be able to answer them, but I'll certainly attempt to. I'm not sure if I can see. Let's have a look.
If you just unshare, it'll resume the different perspective.
Yep.
And you
Like this. Why aren't you letting me do that? There we go. So, are there any questions or queries about the science that I've discussed so far? No?
Actually, I'm going to throw sort of an odd question out here. This is something that I've encountered before. I have a colleague who also is aphantasic and has explored some of it in terms of the philosophical discipline of disability studies from that perspective and looking at the epistemology of it. So it's a different sort of approach. And in our discussions, one of the things that we've talked about is the relationship between this faculty and what is traditionally designated in Platonic epistemology as this faculty of eikasia, is usually translated as imagination. And one of the features of eikasia is the capacity to understand symbols and pictures as pictures, right? To recognize a picture and say, okay, that's not a real thing, that's a representation of something, even when the connection between the representation and the thing itself is sort of scant, is challenging. So the example that I often use is looking at a stick figure, right? And I always joke with my students. I show them the stick figure and I say, well, what is that? And they say, oh, well, that's a person. And I say, okay, good, that's a person. But here's the thing. If you see that walking down the street towards you, run, because something has gone horribly, horribly wrong, right? And yet we can recognize, despite the fact that they don't really look very similar, we can recognize the relationship between the two. Do you know of any evidence that suggests that that kind of relationship or that kind of thinking might also be interrupted for somebody who experiences aphantasia?
I haven't run over anything in the academic literature that I've looked at in particular. Not to say that there's not something out there. From a personal perspective, for me, it's not an issue, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to be for other people. It's interesting. It is something I will take on notice and do a little bit of research and see if I can find anything. Because to be honest, without an understanding of the academic worlds of neurology and psychology, it's very inaccessible sort of material. I read articles and go, well, yeah, okay, what does that mean? I need to find the dumb version, you know?
Yeah, you and me both, don't worry. So, yeah. But yeah, feel free to reach out if we can sort of maybe touch base on the sort of epistemological side of it. Yeah. Thank you.
True's got a question. I've just got a note, and then I'll throw up True's question. It's an interesting thing, and I'm not sure if my wife is going to talk about it. So I'll be the nice husband that I am and talk about it for her, whether she likes it or not, because that's how we operate. I'm currently taking a tarot course, one that integrates a bit of psychology in terms of using the tarot as a self-examination tool rather than a divination tool or fortune telling or even as a magical tool. And the course itself, through the lessons, incorporates guided meditations at the beginning before you to set the stage before you actually get into the exercise. And I mean, everybody knows that I've got a reasonably developed esoteric practice, and I've been doing Gnosticism for entirely too long. And so my wife Kim has an interest in all these things, but hers is much less formal and more on the curious end than the study end. So it was interesting for us to sit down and do a guided meditation together, because that's something we had never done. And I previously wasn't aware until we actually talked about your upcoming talk, that her situation is that she doesn't have the mind's eye. And so so we didn't know this about each other at all, right? Like, she didn't know that I saw things vividly, because I border on the hyperphantasia end of things, and her none at all. And so for her, it was interesting to discover that I do, and it was interesting for me to discover that she doesn't. Now, the interesting thing is, before we knew this about each other before we got to the stage where we had this conversation. We're already 3 or 4 lessons into the tarot course, but after the first one, there was a meditation, so it involves being in nature and blah 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 blah. And I noticed as a part of the meditation that she got really fidgety, like she was moving in her seat, so to speak. And so I made a crack about never being able to sit still because she's fidgety as a rule. And so I asked her about it. I said, well, why were you fidgety? Why were you not getting comfortable? She says, well, I got itchy because the meditation mentioned grass. Now so she had connected herself to sitting in the grass. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks when we discover that her and I have very differing internal worlds, and it only occurred to me now through listening to your talk, because you were talking about multisensory stuff. So she doesn't have an internal world, inner world visualization faculty, but at the same time, she was able to connect the concepts or the things in the meditation enough where she got itchy from sitting in grass, so to speak. So I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of the overlap. And I didn't make so there's still something there. It's just different. The pathway is different. Something is different there, and that's fascinating to me. I guess that overlaps. I'll roll that comment into True's question. She said she was wondering if there's any overlap with synesthesia, or however you pronounce it. Basically the idea of some people will experience sound as color, or imagery as sound, or tactile sensation. The overlap or blurring of the senses, where somebody perceives or receives one type of input as another type of thing.
And again, there might be some overlap. It would depend probably where the individual fell on the spectrum of visual imagery. For me, I don't even see colour in my head. There's nothing. Absolute total darkness when I close my eyes. So I suppose for some there may be that sort of synesthetic overlap. I'm not entirely sure. That's something else I can see if there's any research on, and do a follow-up blog post or something like that if I find anything. But strangely enough, there's not a whole ton of at least accessible research into this sort of stuff. And I suppose, given that it's only been 20 years of research, given money and the such that's needed to do these things, it's to be expected that it's relatively limited, And the fact that for most people's everyday functioning, being aphantasic has little to no impact on regular societal functioning. So it's probably not a field that's felt like it needs a lot of study.
Well, I also think there's something, and I think for me, I can't, in this regard, I can't speak for Kim, but for me, there was just one of those kind of aha moments when you realize just how, for granted or forgiven that you take things. Like it didn't even occur to me that of course, we're different people with different ideas. You should hear us trying to work out the household budget, right? But, so of course there's a certain amount of, difference, and there's also a certain amount of, parallel and traveling in the same direction. We are married after all. We can deal with and put up with each other. So there must be things in which we agree. But the idea that the inner world experience was so far apart didn't even occur to me. For me, it was a shock, right? And
Sorry,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and much the same for my wife and myself. We had the same sort of realizations. She just had no idea that people didn't see things, and the idea that two people could have so vastly different experiences of the internal life was a shock. Yeah.
Bishop Rob has hello, Rob. He's from a sister church of ours. Bishop Rob had a comment saying, was wondering about how hypnosis would be impacted by this, as it's so visual. in experience? And I think that's an interesting question. We actually do have Bishop Bray on our end is a trained hypnotist, but I'm not sure if he's looked into it or not. But I can certainly, he and I talk on a regular basis, so I can certainly ask him about it.
Yeah. I'm not, I keep saying I'm not sure about a lot of things. I'm not sure about hypnotism in particular, but given that I suppose hypnotism is entering I'm assuming from my own limited understanding, a subconscious state, aphantasics can dream visually. It's very weird. I dream rarely. When I do, I believe that it's visual, but once I'm awake and cognizant that I've dreamed, I can't remember the visual material. I can tell myself that the visuals occurred, and I know it's occurred, and I've had a wonderful dream or a terrifying dream where I've seen and experienced things, but my waking experience of that dream personally is totally different. I can't remember the dream in any sort of visual way. So if I was to draw a rather long bow between those two things, I would suggest that maybe in a hypnotic state, an aphantasic could visualize, could see something. I don't know. I don't know whether it's tapping into different parts of the brain when you're in that unconscious sort of subconscious mode or not. I'm not 100% sure. Something else that's kind of interesting is aphantasics can hallucinate, or some can hallucinate on psychotropic substances. If you have acquired aphantasia, it can briefly restore your ability to produce visual images. So if you have a trip and see some wonderful things and you've acquired aphantasia, for a short period afterwards, your brain will return to normal visual functioning of one degree or another. But those like me who have always been mentally visionless, we may be able to, some of us, a very small amount, may be able to hallucinate, but it doesn't impact non-substance-induced visioning. But the research suggests that most aphantasics won't get a visual high either, won't hallucinate. Yeah.
That's interesting. As I say, Kim noted that she dreams very vividly, and I can testify to that because I usually hear about it in the morning. And really weird stuff. True, you had your hand up?
Yes, thank you. This is not based on science necessarily, but my personal experience. I know I'm not the only psychotherapist here. We have Rob and Kim, but I've worked a lot with people with brain differences or you're neural atypical, and the differences that people have aren't always a certain pattern. Like a lot of the science you're reporting, I know it's valid because it's a report and people are doing the research and the work, but there's also a lot of people that are atypical in their patterns, like it's unpredictable, like being able to dream visually, doesn't actually surprise me because anyway, there's just so much variation with how the brain works, even for people that are atypical. I know for me,
absolutely,
I think there's a pattern and you can follow this pattern, but I don't think that's true with the human brain necessarily.
Yeah. Oh, highly complex. And of course, they're talking, any of these studies talking generalities of a very small section of the population. And a lot of the issue with aphantasia is it's all self-identified. There's no actual quantifiable way to absolutely guarantee that someone who reports that that's the way they are actually are the way that they are. It's all very much based on self-identification, despite brain imaging and the such. Because there's the brain is a thing that we only understand, as you well be aware, about, the smallest sliver of, and every time we begin to talk about something new, we're only just barely touching the surface, Yeah. So definitely.
Electrified pudding is our brain.
Yeah, that's right. And even amongst a few other aphantasics I've spoken to, our experiences are vastly different. And in the other half of my presentation, which given time, I'm not sure we'll really get to, we'll see how we go. I do talk about the fact that even for me, I have other neural differences as well, other things that make me atypical, and sometimes it's difficult to differentiate. Okay, what that's occurring in whatever it is that I'm doing is caused by my aphantasia or by some other part of my quirkiness or other thing going on inside of my head as well. I suppose whenever we try and look at just one little box of our functioning, our brain doesn't function in boxes, it functions as a whole, So to just try and look at one little functioning is really flawed in and of itself. So absolutely, all of this research, or any research that tries to pull out one little part of our functioning and discuss it, is by its nature probably flawed, Anything else? No? Well, I will continue. I realise that we've been going for nearly an hour. I was terribly worried that my presentation would be way short because when I had a run through, it only ran for about half the time that we've already had. So, and I had a feeling it had happened, but So we'll continue, and now we're entering into the part of my presentation that is more based on my own experiences and my own personal neurology and neural makeup and functioning. So clearly, the way that I function and the way that I work around what I perceive as my deficits will be very different to others. And I suppose in a venue like this, where often we're talking about very practical or at least applicable academic fields to gnosis and Gnosticism, we're probably left with the question at this point of, well, so what? For the average religious practitioner, lacking the ability to visualize probably has little impact on their life. When it comes to religious devotion, people gather, they listen to talks or homilies, they perform rituals, they participate in sacraments, they have discussions, they learn a whole range and fleet of activities that aren't in any way inhibited by lacking visualization skills, mental visualization skills. But, and with all things like this, there's always buts. Anyone who knows a Johannite, or those in our little corner of the world, knows that religious practice, that church practice, is only a small part usually of the paths that we journey on. If we were to survey the people who were present, I'm pretty sure that we'd find that there'd be a whole range of spiritual practices amongst us. There are probably practitioners of the Golden Dawn and Martinism, Thelema, the Ogdoadic tradition, various forms and schools of meditation, druids, grimoire magicians, all sorts of stuff present here just in this small selection from our corner of the world. And I in no way claim to be an expert in any of these things or to have practiced them or to have studied them to any great degree, but I have been on a personal journey, both practically and through study, I won't say academically, that's shown me that an awful lot of groups of this kind of nature include acts and practices that at least imply the necessity of a mind's eye, or at least some form of internal mystical viewing or experiencing ability. Now, I had a bit of difficulty when trying to put this part of my presentation together, despite having been through formation processes in a couple of different religious communities, despite considering myself an open book and thinking that I spent a lot of time delving inwards. It was actually really difficult for me to be introspective about my own personal practice and the things that I do and why I do them. I also want to make it clear that whatever I say in this next part about the practices of particular groups are definitely not a reflection on those groups and their practices or the way they do things. I'm simply speaking from personal reflection on personal experiences with those approaches that are embedded within various traditions. So as an aphantasic individual, I've found approaching the materials of a lot of, I'm going to use the word esoteric groups, might not be the best term to use, but I think it's a term we can all understand for that whole Western mystery tradition, spirituality kind of thing that gets lumped together. When I approach those materials over the length of my journey, they've quite often engendered two linked feelings. The first quite often being one of frustration and deficiency. That then leads to the second, which is a good dose of what's colloquially termed imposter syndrome. I've practically engaged in a serious nature with a couple of initiatic esoteric systems. And as I approached my first foray into esotericism, I found myself immediately, almost like from the very first meeting, hitting a wall put up by my aphantasia. It's no secret since the publication of Israel Regardie's materials on the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that the Golden Dawn tradition has as its first basic practice that a neophyte takes up on a daily basis as the banishing ritual of the pentagram. The instructions on performing this ritual in its various forms across various books, across various schools, because it's very widespread now, all indicate the need to incorporate visualization of various objects or events or things occurring on another plane, on, say, the astral plane. This format of ritual work, relying on or at least incorporating visualizing of unseen spiritual elements, is found throughout a number of organizations that follow similar traditions as the Golden Dawn. Now, as someone who's never seen an image in their head at all, or for that factor, an object before my eyes that doesn't actually exist in the material world, and there's a whole other talk in that outside visualization, but we won't go into that. These first steps alone initially engendered the idea that something was intrinsically wrong with me, and that the traditions that have benefited so many people in the past with connecting with the divine and themselves simply wouldn't work for me. But through that process, I came to understand a little bit more about myself and persisted through those feelings. Then imposter syndrome sets in, where you're sitting in a meeting where you know everyone around you at this particular practice is purportedly all experiencing these things on the astral plane and seeing things, and you're sitting there seeing nothing and sort of waiting for that moment where someone's going to go, hang on, we didn't see you on the astral plane, what was going on with you, and being found out as a total fraud. And I'm sure that if these feelings emerge for me, they emerge for others who want to seriously engage with spirituality in that sense, and with what's termed the great work and connecting with the divine. And it would probably, these things turn, I would think, at least some seekers of that process, of that, that would benefit from that, away, stop them even looking altogether. So what is it that changed for me? What is it that has allowed me to continue on these chosen paths that incorporate visualization as key elements of almost every second thing that we do? In short, it's been a process of education and self-acceptance. After a lifetime of being mentally blinded, not actually knowing it, because unless you talk to someone about what goes on in your head, there's really no way to know that you're different at all. I think realizing that it was normal to be different played a big part. Just knowing that, you know, there was other people that thought like me, that regardless of what the book said, there were people for whom images in their head weren't a thing. It's totally changed my outlook on my esoteric spiritual path and allowed me to overcome barriers. And because I've recognized these differences about myself, something that I'd hope that those who lead spiritual groups would take away from this talk, I suppose, this presentation with them, is when people or seekers approach you, to really make an effort not to begin at a point of expecting everyone to be able to do everything that everyone has always done. I think we really need to begin at a point of expecting neurological diversity in whatever form it comes. As we've come to delve more into the human psyche and the human neurological processes, I think that society has definitely come to understand that the homogeny that we've kind of expected in the past, that, you know, there was a typical person and there was a typical way of functioning, simply doesn't exist. Yes, there may be a large group of people that do function in X way or Y way, but especially when it comes to our interior lives, there is no typical. And if we want to be truly inclusive of all those who seek a connection with the divine, we need to recognize that these differences exist. And, you know, something as simple as asking someone what their life inside their head is like, what they see when they've experienced their first visualization exercise before entering lodge was like. Actually having those conversations can, I think, over time assist us to work on methods and ways of working that will benefit a greater range of individuals and a greater diversity. And if nothing else, we can simply help people to begin a journey to understanding their own makeup better, which if nothing else, that's what the journey of esotericism, I think, really is, coming to be connected with ourselves, and by connecting with ourselves, connect with the other as well. Now, I know that a lot of the traditions that we deal with have long and rich histories in it, and it seems that the processes that they rely on, which have very much been cross-seeded across organisations, may not be the most useful necessarily for all seekers, or maybe in the long run, even for a majority. This especially comes to light when we as society further delves into understanding the human psyche and the true variety of neurodivergence that exists. When we consider all of this information, for me, it becomes clear that maybe old patterns and old ways of doing things need to maybe be reconsidered, or at least there be a willingness to learn and discover new ways to perform old tasks, and that maybe these sorts of offerings can be integrated into the systems that we all know and love so much. I work in the education field, I've worked for government, and I've been involved in institutional change processes a number of times, and I know that change isn't easy. They can take a long time, can be resisted by those who've always been served by methods that are seen as tried and true. However, I personally feel that if the great work is to continue and the opportunity to progress be offered to all genuine seekers, both tradition and progress need to be embraced. If we reflect on the history of esotericism, it's really only in the relatively recent past that the then emerging field of psychology was added to the toolkit of the esoterically minded. And I don't think that anyone who belongs to groups with these sorts of practices would doubt that the world of esotericism would be a vastly different and probably lacking place if psychology had been excluded as something new. We don't need to delve into that sort of stuff, you know. So I suppose what I wanted to discuss was how maybe I've adapted my own practice to be able to work within within systems that don't suit my inner world. And look, I'm not going to say that my esoteric life, my spiritual practice life has suddenly become so easy now that I understand this one facet of my existence. But I'll say that accepting it and coming to understand it has allowed me to bring down to some degree some of those barriers that I feel have been built by myself to limit my success. Now when I explore materials or new practices that require visualizations, I don't necessarily perceive them as a stumbling block. Instead, I've started to embrace the idea that visualization means something different for me than it does for those with an active mind's eye. I still kind of say that I visualize. Instead of imagery, I use other mental faculties to enable me to overcome a perceived deficit. Now, it's a little bit hard for me to explain the process that I undergo to replace visualization, but in simple terms, and I'm going to use the word visualize, but it doesn't make sense in the way that you'll probably think it does, but I visualize using words. When I ran through this talk with my wife, when I said that, she immediately thought, oh, he sees words in his head. He can't see pictures, so he sees words. Well, sadly, words in your head are pictures. So I can't see words. What I'm talking about is that I form a thought in my mind, not in images, but as verbalizations. If I need to visualize a blue flame in my mind, I will do so by talking about it in my head. I'll engage in a personal interior conversation about the blue flame, telling myself how it looks, how it feels, how it smells. By doing this, I don't see the flame. I don't feel or smell the flame because I have multi-sensory imagery deficits. But acknowledging it with my interior monologue, for want of a better term, it kind of tricks my brain in a way. I don't like the word trick, but it lets me know that thing exists. So if we look back at some of the findings of the science that I talked about earlier, when attempting to visualize aphantasics, activate areas of the mind associated with behavior and planning, areas that to my way of thinking, and we could probably argue about this, feel a little bit more rational and scholastic, I suppose, a little bit more, I don't know, when I'm planning something, I'm thinking about something. And I believe that using this verbal method is in the same way that someone who is visualizing in images is activating their visual processing, that by using rational thought through verbal language in my head is activating those same sorts of parts of my brains, maybe, I'm just guessing, as would happen when I try and imagine something, because that's how I imagine. That's how my imaginative process happens as well in spoken word. It's kind of like, I think I sort of have thought of it as like my rational mind tries to convince itself to perform something irrational through dialogue, through internal dialogue. Look, at times it can be very difficult to be basically holding a conversation with yourself in your head and recalling and remembering what comes next in the visualization, what comes next in the ritual, what comes next, where am I walking to next? So what I've started doing is creating audio files. If I have to perform a task that requires visualization, I will take the outline of the practice and put it into an audio form so that when I want to perform that practice, I can put the words telling me what to do in my head so that my head can then continue having a conversation with itself and constructing my word salad images while still being reminded of what I'm meant to be doing. Now, I'm pretty sure that to those who simply sit down and think in images and visualize and perform the ritual and see what they're meant to see, that sounds bloody confusing. And even just saying it out loud again for about the fifth time, it sounds confusing to myself. But to me, in my brain, it's no more confusing than the idea of sitting down and seeing something in there. So when we encounter folks like me, I suppose I'm sharing this kind of practical idea as a way of saying maybe we can look outside of the box a little bit and try and think about finding alternative ways to work with individuals who feel that they can't or have a little bit more difficulty accessing that interior world in the same way as a lot of our materials that we share, a lot of our practices that we want to share with others kind of suggest we need to. I've got a whole other section of rambling on, I suppose, deeper aspects of my spirituality that I think come out of what I think of as a little bit of an almost hyper-rational thinking approach to things. But we're sort of running out of time, so I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about more confusing kind of matters. But how I think this whole process has affected my overall spiritual journey is that my spiritual life, I've always felt, has been deficient. Where concepts of religious experience are concerned, when we read and discuss the experiences of others, when I've talked with people who've undergone spiritual awakenings and renewals and been through processes and walked paths, when I hear the experiences that they have, to me, I kind of don't have experiences like that. I suppose that mystical kind of world, I feel, doesn't exist in the same way for me. And talking with Timotheus, with Tim, a few times, I think that my approach to spirituality is a little bit more material and concrete, I suppose a little bit more rational. I use that term, using the rational to do the irrational. As an example, one of the most spiritually recharging practices that I have is maintaining an oil lamp. I know for some people, when we talk about spiritually recharging, they talk about their meditative practices, their things that they do. They sit, they calm, they enter, they connect with the divine, with the otherworldly, and with themselves through almost sort of passive means. But for myself, that's never really worked for me. So it's odd, I think, what people express as those connections they feel there, I experience through very practical practices. So my oil lamp. I have an oil lamp in front of a statue in my home that I keep burning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year. And maintaining that oil lamp is a terribly spiritual practice that in doing that I feel connects me with the divine and the other. Now, when I say that, I don't mean looking at the flame. I don't mean meditating on the flame. I don't mean praying over the flame, but literally the cleaning, the trimming, the refueling, the lighting, those sorts of things connect me. That actual process I feel connects me with the divine. And it harkens back a little bit to something that I heard Bishop Rasbach say earlier when he was talking about ritual, mentioned his own ritual practices. I think that the actual physical act of ritual practice can be recognized as being just as connecting to the divine as any interior process that goes along with it. Because for me, I don't have a strong interior spiritual life. My spiritual life tends to be more, or feel at least, more exterior, and the exterior brings the interior into play. And it's interesting. I've sort of quite often had a conversation with people in my parish about the fact that I drive 6 hours round trip to perform mass, and quite often I'm asked, isn't that a bit of a burden on you, Brenden? Maybe you shouldn't be coming every 2 months. Maybe you should come less. Maybe we should come to you. Maybe. But something, and I suppose I've never expressed this to them, is that the actual driving, the setting up, the driving home is actually a great spiritual exercise that connects and refuels me. Even though I might be physically tired, I come home from just the act of driving, from performing, I come back feeling very refreshed, and that the drive itself unites me to the divine. When I arrive in Brisbane after 3+ hours drive, I could turn around and go home. I've had my spiritual experience for the day. Yes, I get something out of Mass, of course, and with performing the sacraments and that ritualism and gathering together. But yeah, I don't know. I think that all of these things sort of meld together into something that, for me, feels like a very atypical approach to spirituality. Now, I've kind of probably sound like I've raved for the last 5-10 minutes because I've kind of taken a couple of pages and hobbled it together in some sort of quick way because I've got like 10 minutes left according to my clock. But I want to thank everybody for persisting with me and my ramshackle brain and my thoughts today. I know the first half of the presentation was a bit full on with talks of neurology and images and bits of the brain and things like that. And then the second half was a hodgepodge of my own thoughts and ideas and my own ways and ideas of connecting with the divine. But I hope that opening up dialogue about neurodivergence and about difference may continue to open discussion within our different spheres of influence about difference and about inclusion and how we can work differently occasionally to incorporate as many people as we can into what is a wonderful experience. Gnosis and the striving for Gnosis and connecting with communities and practices such as we're all involved in are truly wonderful things, and I think can be of nothing but benefit to people. So I'll turn my presentation off, and now's a perfect time for any finishing up questions or dialogue that may want to occur, telling me I'm a complete nut job and, a defrocking eminence, or something of the sorts,
There's a lot of people in that line that are in front of you, so don't worry about it. Mar Thomas had a question. He said, a simple and really complicated question with a big agenda behind it. Says, expect you can guess, do you consider aphantasia to be a disability?
Oh, look, that's a huge question. I have a stepson with autism, high functioning. I don't necessarily consider that a disability. I think that term disability is very, very loaded within in itself, and kind of denotes lack or I don't know. I don't consider myself or my aphantasia a disability. It is simply a difference that we need to work around. And I think that a lot of folks with disabilities, different abilities, may feel the same way about that. I'm not real sure. Personally, I don't think it's a disability. It's just a It's just a difference. And I suppose it's a difference that for many people doesn't affect their functioning within normal society, if that makes sense. I don't know. That's a really big question. Yeah.
Well, definitely. I mean, with the experience that I related earlier, talking about Kim and I doing the meditation together, and you talking about it as a difference rather than a disability. I mean, the thing that was interesting to me, as I mentioned, the whole idea that she got fidgety because she got itchy because she was approaching the practice of being in grass, which is something that, while she doesn't have the interior world imagery of the thing that we were trying to build up, she kind of leapfrogged that to a degree to have a tactile experience that I can't have. So it seems to me that it's not I don't know a better way to phrase it. It's not a lack of pathway. It's a different pathway.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me where the differences are, because I mean, I think there might be, I guess a so-called sense of immediate deficiency or weakness, but I think if we understood it better, then it's one of those things where, kind of like Aikido or jujitsu in an esoteric, spiritual, or mental point of view, that there's something there that, once understood, can be tapped and harnessed in a different way to bring a fuller experience, right? Because I mean, clearly, she had a moment of experience that was deeper than the one that I had, right?
Yeah.
Because she got itchy.
And I think that's the important thing. It's about trying to look at difference. It's not only aphantasia; it's a whole ream of differences that can be looked at in the same way. Sometimes when people approach the sort of practices that we use, they get that initial, I can't do that. And so those feelings of deficiency, but by discovering that people have the deficiency or have a different way of thinking or doing, educating on that, coming to understand it, and then accepting it, we can then work out that, hey, it's okay. I can't visualize, but you know what? I can feel the grass. And you know what? Even though, 200 years of folks doing this have said, I have to see the grass, you know what? If I can feel it, that's actually good enough. When the book tells me I need to see something, I'm going to feel it. But until we have a conversation and go, it's actually okay to not do these things, I think there'll always be people who feel, well, I can't do that thing that way, so that means I shouldn't be doing it. And it's just a process of educate, understand, accept. I think. Yeah. It's all only thinks. I'm only having thoughts.
Thank you. I was going to say it is definitely a thing where, once, and I think having a presentation, having a talk and a discussion about it has been helpful, because, over the last year or two, I mean, at least for me, I've seen folks kind of pop up in all aspects of my life where, their experience is aligned with yours. And I had no idea, like the experience of, discovering the secret room in our house, so to speak, the idea that, Kim and I have different inner worlds, in seeing it pop up with other people, you talk about only 5%, but at least in my own world, it's a lot more common than I could have possibly realized.
And that 5% is an estimate based on, again, research, limited people, self-reporting. It could be more, but that's just based on evidence to hand. Yeah. Well, that's kind of all, folks. If nobody has anything else.
That was excellent. Thank you.
Oh, I'm glad, and I took an hour and a half where I thought I'd only take half an hour. So,
I told you. I said it would be fine. It turned out fine. Sean has a question.
Yeah, actually, real quick, and thank you so much, because I have aphantasia too, and also a very chattery mental dialogue. And I wonder, now some people also have no inner monologue as well. And so I wonder if people like that, like doing the LBRP as an example, if it would make sense to like speak it all, you know, like Raphael's in the east with the yellow, like saying it all out loud.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I did read an article the other day from someone who lacks both audible and visual imagery in the brain, and it can be very difficult. They did sort of describe it as a meditator's delight, because outside of external stimuli, there is nothing going on to interrupt sitting in nothingness, because there's, the lights are on and brain functions there, but there's no images, there's no words, there's no conversation, there's no nothing. But then I have also heard of people who it's a rather maddening experience not being able, they don't, I can't understand it. I can't begin to understand how it functions, neither seeing nor thinking, because my mind is always totally active with verbal words. Always. I can be having a conversation with my wife, but there's actively things going on in my mind in words over the top of it. So I couldn't imagine a silent brain with just nothing,
Yeah.
But I definitely think verbalizing everything would definitely be an option there. Would be the workaround to visualization or internal monologue. Yeah. Lovely.
Well, thank you. That was great.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So with that, we will. I thought there was a hand up that was clapping.
There you go. Kim and I are long lost twins. I really hope she doesn't look like me, though. If she does, no wonder you wear glasses. Your vision must be terrible.
Well, I don't think you're 4 feet tall, so I like the joke that Kim is a Smurf. She's 3 apples tall, but it gives her an amazing collection of shoes. So with that, we will wrap for the evening or the morning, as it were, depending on where you're at, and we pick up tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Mountain Time for our main speaker, our keynote, our sort of keynote, as it were, Dr. James McGrath. He's going to be talking about John the Baptist, the Mandeans, and a whole bunch of interesting stuff. Followed after that, we have Mark Thomas with talking about Zoroastrianism and a whole bunch of other words that I can't pronounce. After that, we have Bishop Bray Weaver with Taoism. And then after that, we've got a pretty, weighty thinking day tomorrow. After that, we have Joanne with the Divine Feminine and Sethian Gnosticism. So we're getting into all the nerdy stuff tomorrow. Not that we haven't had some nerdy stuff today, because we certainly have. We've Kim's giving me a hard time. So thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed the opening day of Conclave. It's great to see some old faces. In fact, fantastic to see some new faces. Like I mentioned, we usually get people that come and go, and I'm sure there are people also that sign up just to get a copy of the talks, because let's be honest, it's a steal of the deal. So I imagine there will be a few more new folks and faces that we get to connect with. I think something like a third of our attendees are all folks who have never attended a conclave before, which is stuff that I love to see. So I hope they enjoy it, and I hope you guys are enjoying it. So, and don't forget, let some questions percolate in your brain for Sunday's opening talk. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, 1:30 Mountain Time. In the meantime, stay sane and stay safe. Yep.